Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 34 of the Brighter Horizons podcast. I'm really excited to be here. Are you excited to be here?
Yes, sir. Let's get it.
Yeah, and today we are talking about friends, empathy, helping other people. I believe that after doing 33 episodes of this, you may have learned how to help yourself. So sometimes, once you begin and learn how to float, you help others tread the water as well. So in this episode, we're going to be discussing how you can help other people without harming yourself, which is a very important thing. Sometimes people will go to save others while they're drowning. Don't do that. Be a little bit selfish sometimes. Help yourself first and then help others.
I mean, there's a reason why the airplanes always say put your oxygen mask on first.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be able to help anyone if you're dead.
Exactly. And I think that's a big problem that a lot of people have, is that they try to help other people when they themselves aren't full. Mm-hmm. And also, especially, I'd say in relationships, you see it very often, where a person will go seeking for somebody else to complete themselves. So when that person's gone, you feel like there's a hole in you. The hole is not from that person being gone, but the fact that you were never complete.
He's spitting.
Dude, we're 1 minute and 30 seconds into the episode already spitting.
All right, well, let's get into it. First of all, I would like to give you the dictionary definition.
Before we do that.
Oh.
Crazy. First off, absolute thank you to all of you, because we just hit over 100,000 views on YouTube.
Do we actually?
Yeah. Like 102,000 views. So, I know that's not crazy for an entire channel, but to us, that's pretty crazy, because I never thought 101,000 views would ever happen.
Yeah.
Because I was going to say people, but it's not really different people. But anyway, thank you guys so much. Anybody who watches this video, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're really gaining something from these videos. But yeah, 100,000 views. Super stoked about this. I couldn't stop smiling last night when I saw it, because we were at 99,000, and then I was like 2 days ago, and then I checked my phone today, and I was like, oh my God, we actually hit over 100,000 views. But
so, yeah. Thank you guys so much for all the support. As always, we're going to keep improving and getting better and delivering more positivity to you guys. And we're working on new things. And I'm just very grateful that all you guys can tag along for this ride. It's kind of like investing in somebody that you know is going to go places. So stick with us for the ride. We're going to go far, and you guys are going to be day ones for us. So thank you so much for all the support. And let's jump into it.
Yeah.
So first of all, dictionary definition of empathy is the ability to understand and share feelings of another person. Pretty simple definition, but it's important that you get that out of the way. What is empathy? Because obviously I'm assuming most people have a general understanding of what it is, but boiled down to its basic form, that's what it is. So what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think it's funny because it's such a big thing that we discuss in school all the time, but I guess nobody really takes it to heart how important it is, because it always seems kind of corny, put yourself in the other person's shoes. How would you feel if you were in that scenario? Yeah. And people always say that, oh, why would you, hurt a tree, because what if somebody punched you, right? I think it's at the extremes, it really doesn't make sense, but at its core, treat others the way you want to be treated. It's that simple.
Yeah.
It's the golden rule, is what we've been taught since we were kids. But so many people nowadays don't apply it. Mm-hmm. For example, today, I was actually at the barbershop getting a haircut. I'm not wearing a hat because the haircut's bad, but I usually cut my hair pretty short.
He just wears hats all the time.
I do wear hats all the time. And also, I cut my hair short at the barbershop so that it can grow out for a longer period of time, so I don't need to go out, get a haircut as often, because I'm broke. But the point that I was making was, I went to the barbershop, and in my head, I was waiting for a specific barber, because he's I'm chill with him, and he cuts my hair good. And this other guy asked me, he's like, oh, do you want to go? But he had somebody else who was waiting specifically for him. So I was like, hey, man, you're already waiting for him. You can go ahead. It's fine. I don't really have anywhere to be right now, so you can go ahead. And he's like, are you sure, man? Are you sure, man? And I was like, yeah, go ahead. And I realized that had I been in a scenario where I really needed to get a haircut from a specific person and somebody else was willing to give up their time so that I could, I was like, that would make me really happy. I'd really, that would make my day probably, because I like to celebrate the little things. And if somebody's willing to do that for me, it would make me feel a lot happier. So I was like, you know what, man, go ahead. And this isn't me boasting about how I'm the greatest human being ever, but this is me saying that being kind to others is something you learn by putting yourself in their scenarios, right? Because you got to think about how do I want to be treated? It's exactly what we've been talking about this whole time, is how would I want to be treated in this scenario?
So it's interesting in that situation, because you not only did something good for that person, but you also did something good for yourself. because you were waiting for your specific barber and you gave the spot up to the other guy. Interestingly enough, I find that in the world, when you do good things, even if it's not that immediate moment, typically things turn out good for you as well. Like when you do good things for others, good things come back to you. And as people who grew up Buddhist, obviously I believe in karma to an extent. As you do good things, I don't really know if I believe in the whole, you do good things, you accumulate it, and then one day it all comes back. But I definitely believe that as you put out more good into the world, eventually you'll accumulate a life that's worth living. And more importantly, you'll have a lot of, admiration for your own actions.
Yeah, exactly. It's like being able to wake up in the mirror and be happy about who you see back. If you're somebody who is always doing wrong, I don't think that you would wake up and smile about your own life. But if you can, because sometimes it's hard to see our progress ourselves, like how we're becoming better people. But when you hear it from somebody else, that's when it's the most impressive, I'd say.
Yeah.
Or most satisfying. Like take the gym, for example. A lot of people work out and they get what? Body dysmorphia. So when they look in the mirror, they don't see a super, jacked, healthy guy. They see somebody with a ton of flaws. But when somebody else comes along and says, dude, your physique is crazy, that skyrockets their mood. Why? Because it's something that we value. We do value others' opinions. Well, I think it's always best to believe in yourself. A little help from others can go a long way. Do you know who said that?
Uncle Ira.
Exactly. And the point is that you don't need to help. First off, there is truth to the fact that helping will come back and do good for you. But it's funny because in Buddhism, I think it's very paradoxical because the point is, with good karma and bad karma, you're supposed to do good without expecting anything in return. That's how you accumulate good karma. But by doing that, technically you are getting something in return. So it's interesting. I guess it lies in the intention. Your intention should never be to get something out of it.
Yeah.
That's why I don't like people who are debt collectors and they'll be like, oh, I helped you this one time. And I don't mean financially wise. I mean emotionally wise. Like, I helped you this one time, so you got to help me out. Don't expect other people to be you. And just because other people aren't kind doesn't mean that you shouldn't be, right? It's just because everybody else is doing something that's wrong doesn't make it right. And just because nobody's doing something that's right doesn't make it wrong.
Dude, that's crazy. I actually wrote that down for one of the future quotes of the week.
Really?
Except it's worded differently. Yeah. Regardless, the sentiment remains. And at the end of the day, empathy is at the center of everything. That's what allows you to be compassionate towards people, and it helps you understand everyone around you. Because if you can't understand people, you don't have friends, you won't have good relationships with your family, you won't be able to develop a good love life. Regardless, you need to have empathy no matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
And another thing that I realized about empathy is what gives successful people a very good reputation. And the reason why I say that is people who make it to the top and they look back at where they started, they can see other people starting out. And if they feel the empathy of, oh, I remember when I was in that situation, go after it, chase your dreams. That's how motivational speakers are born, because they came from something. They started with nothing, they built an empire, and then they look back on the little guy who's starting out now and says, hey, you got this. I started where you were. You want to know the greatest example of that? David Goggins. This guy was overweight, broke, and lonely, and he came from a broken home as well. He had nothing, but he turned his life around, became somebody great. Now, when he looks at other people who are just starting their journey, he tells them that it's possible. He empathizes with the people at the bottom, and more importantly, he is a hero. A lot of people look up to him and say, he was capable of doing this. I look up to him, right? Especially when I'm running. I'm about to collapse and die from how much I'm running, and I'm like, you know what? He was able to do this. He was able to do a lot more. So that means I can push myself a little more every time. Just knowing that somebody of that stature came from where you came from can be very inspiring for a lot of people. So in your life, when you get to the top, having that empathy is very important. And I think that's what makes you truly successful. The ability to give back to others, right? To give them that sense of drive and motivation.
It's to pull people up from where you came from.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, I just kind of realized this kind of a thought, is that empathy kind of goes two ways, right? So think about when you're in a bad scenario, someone can empathize with your bad scenario, but you should be able to empathize with other people's good scenarios, if that makes sense. So for example, if you don't really have the motivation to achieve your goal, look at somebody who does or who has achieved your goal and think about the kind of life that they live. And now you think, is that what I want? Because if it is, that's going to give you motivation to, go and achieve your goal. So putting yourself in the person who succeeded shoes is just as important as putting yourself in the person who's failed shoes, right?
I'd say that it's different situations.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's helpful in different scenarios.
Like, one is to help yourself be better, and the other is to help
others.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's facts.
So, like, it's like running forward and pulling someone with you, right? Obviously, running forward is going to, or I'm trying to think of it as like because if you think about like a scale, you have like one person here, you're here, and that's where you want to go. So either you're running this way or you're pulling this person to you.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
So
that's like the two sides of empathy. It's not only to benefit others, but also for yourself. Because at the end of it, self-improvement is the most important thing. So as I said in the intro, I wanted this to be very clear. Throughout this episode, we're talking a lot about helping other people. But ensure that you're safe first. Because when you go around trying to help every other person but yourself, your life will become miserable. And you can't fulfill yourself with other people. You're your own person. Help yourself. Empathize with their pain, understanding that you have some too. Yeah. Right? We're not perfect people. So go about your life and heal yourself first, and then go and heal everybody else.
100%. Literally a big part of my backstory, which I've told on several episodes, is the fact that during my high school years, I lived for the approval of others and to do what other people thought I should. Not for myself, not to become the best version of me or to do what I actually enjoy. But then after graduating is when I learned that if I abandon everybody else's opinions, realistically, the only reason I still feel hollow is because I haven't given myself approval. And that's because I haven't done things that I actually enjoy. So then from that point on, I worked on myself, and now I'm in a position where I can actually tell other people, this is what worked for me. I'm actually becoming successful in certain things, and here's how you could do it too.
Exactly.
But if you're not already there, then it's harder to tell other people how to do it too.
And
right?
I know it sounds stupid coming from two basically kids who haven't had as much real world experience as many of you have, but
okay, don't lump me in and call me a kid, all right?
You're very young compared to many people.
I'm young, but that doesn't make me a kid.
Farthest, like, you are super young compared to the majority of the population, if you think about it.
Is that really true?
You're in like the 25% of like people. If you think about like age, let's say that you divide it into like 80 years is like the average lifespan. I don't know. I think that's pretty high though. I think the average lifespan is a little lower. But any case, 80 years.
Okay, regardless. Yeah, I might be.
I'd say that we may have not had as much life experience as you. But I think that developing this mindset at a young age is very helpful. Because going throughout my life, I've begun to figure out who I am. So I'd say that learning about who you are is not something that happens like over... I mean, it is something that happens over a long period of time, but it doesn't mean you have to start late. Mm-hmm. Especially for kids going in high school and university, I'd say. Because I'm going into university now, and I've seen a lot of people around that didn't really know what they wanted to do. And that caused them to, struggle a lot throughout school because they had no direction of where they want to be. So you need to take the time to figure yourself out. Because if you constantly go around looking for everybody else to, please and doing all this school stuff for other people, you're going to waste a lot of time. And more importantly, you're going to be miserable.
Yeah.
You can't rely on other people to fulfill you. You are your own person. And again, if you are empty without other people around, it simply means that you aren't complete. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. The whole part of life is figuring it out. Like, I'll admit that if I was alone, I'd feel kind of empty sometimes too. But again, I haven't figured myself out completely. I work on it, and on the days where I'm good, on the days where I feel great, I try to help other people. And that's how you should live your life too. When you're happy, share it with the world.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, going back to the main topic of empathy, I was thinking about this as I sat down earlier. I was sitting on the balcony reading my book, right? And I realized something, that empathizing with the people around you, it doesn't have to be about something super deep. It could be just a superficial opinion, like what kind of car you like. But empathizing with someone, sharing those feelings, can help you find like-minded individuals to build friendships, relationships, or teams that will help you achieve any goal in life. And the greatest example of this comes from the book that I'm reading right now, which is titled Built to Last: Habits of Visionary Companies. And essentially this book details the differences between companies that last several lifetimes, such as Walmart, Disney, Sony, large companies like that have survived for hundreds of years, compared, a little over 100 years. A lot of them have actually approached or surpassed 100 years in life. But regardless, the difference between those companies and companies that did good in the same era but didn't last as long as the visionary companies, okay? One critical aspect of all visionary companies is that the workforce there has a cult-like following and mindset about what they do. They love it, they live it, they breathe it. And if you don't fit into that, then you don't belong at the company. It's pretty basic. But the interesting thing about that is if you do love that, you belong there so well because you empathize with the people around you. You can see, oh, these guys are just like me. They love exactly what I love. So building the skill of empathy is very important, not just in feelings and talking to your friends, but also in the real world where you're working on businesses, where you're working at an office. Like if you're managing a division in your specific company, it's important to be able to empathize either as a boss or an employee. Regardless, it's a very important skill. You got to be versed with it in order to do well.
Yeah, it's like, making friends using empathy by wondering, being curious about what other people are interested in, right? It's very important. It's like the clip from Ted Lasso, where it's be curious, not judgmental. So go around your life, and when you speak with people, be curious enough to inquire about what they might want. And also, it's because I think a lot of us deep down feel that way. Like, if you are really well known about a specific topic, when somebody you don't know comes and asks you about that topic, it's like always a great conversation. For me, it's like watches or cars, right? There's something I know a lot about. So when somebody would come up to me and talk about watches, I could talk about watches all day, right? So I know that that's a great feeling for me, even if I know that that person might not know as much, right? I've talked to people who know nothing about watches, but they continue to ask questions because they're interested, because they care. So do that for other people. Be interested in the uninteresting. Even if it's not interesting to you, it is for them. So it might not mean anything to you, but that doesn't mean it won't mean anything for them.
Yeah, some of my greatest memories like when I used to work at McDonald's, some of my greatest memories are when people would come through the drive-thru and I talk to them about something random, but something I'm interested in and I can see that they're interested in. For example, a guy came in with a nice blue BMW M2. And I remember asking him, dude, this is a sick car. Like, how much did you get it for? What year is it? Blah, blah, blah. We start talking. And he's like, you want me to rev it? I was like, hell yeah, run it. And he just starts revving that thing in the middle of the drive-thru. My manager got so mad. But it was so funny. And I loved it. I gave him a fist bump and he drove off. Another time, this guy, I'll never forget him, okay? He came in through the drive-thru and he was wearing a Rolex. And I start talking to him. And I'm like, dude, nice watch. He's like, I didn't think you'd pick up on that. But then I talked to him and he's like, yeah, I'm a lawyer. I'm actually on my way to go to a case right now. And he was just chatting it up with me, and he inspired me. He said, dude, I see something in you, and I know that you're going to go places. Never forget him. He actually came back later that day and gave me a $20 tip, I'll say. He just gave me a $20 bill and said, take this from somebody who believes in you. And he drove off. He also just passed his Rolex to me and let me look at it and just, like, wear it and see it. And it was really such a good experience. But people like that inspire you to be better. So when you hear about stories like that, or when you experience it, it makes you want to go out there and pass it on to other people too, right? It's just such an inspiring moment. And being able to understand that and feel that is really important.
Yeah, it's like it's having belief in other people.
Yeah.
It means the world to them. Again, the things that are important to you might not always be important to the other guy. Like, to that man, what he did, the $20 that he gave you, and the words that he said may not have meant the world to him. Because it wasn't... It might be an everyday thing to him, but to you, it's a completely different thing, right? It's a huge, huge change. It's like what we said earlier, is that helping one person might not change the world, but it might change their world, right? Is that the impact of your actions is not always what you perceive. And there's a little excerpt from this reel that I watched, and I really, really liked it. And what it said was, when someone says you've hurt them, their pain is not up for debate. Most of us consider ourselves to be good people, people who would not hurt others intentionally. However, intent doesn't always align with impact. What you mean to do might not always be what happens. And it's funny because it's always our first instinct. When somebody says, like, man, you really hurt me when you did that, one of our first instincts is to get defensive and justify why we did it. We still apologize, but we don't accept the fact that it's really our fault. And that's okay. Accepting your mistakes doesn't make you wrong. It doesn't make you any more wrong than you were going into the scenario. That's something that have a hard time wrapping my head around. But the truth is, when you make a mistake, accepting it doesn't make it worse. It just ends it. If you continue to live in denial about a mistake or a fault or someone you hurt, you continue to deny that you did it. What happens in the end? You live with that for the rest of your life. But if you accept that fact, you become better. You become more mature. You learn. Accept your fallings and understand that other people aren't you. You might have intended to do something good, but you messed up. That's okay. Accept it and move on. And most of all, apologize and don't get defensive. Because again, when you hurt somebody, it's not about you anymore. It's about them. So understand that. It's not about your intention, but about your impact.
100%. And it's interesting because getting into arguments and stuff is such a common occurrence these days. People fight over everything. And it's funny, I actually watched a TED Talk about empathy, and it was from a guy named Jamil Zaki, okay? And he was talking about how the world has changed over time. And interestingly enough, he opens up the TED Talk with this question. He asks the audience, I want you to count on your fingers and show me, like a show of hands pretty much, 1 being you don't feel at all, 5 being you 100% agree with the statement. And he asked questions that gauge the audience's ability to empathize with others. For example, the first question was, I feel concerned about people less fortunate than me. So 1 being I don't care at all, 5 being I am very concerned. Most people put up a 4 or a 3 or something like that, or 4 or 5, I guess. And he showed a study of how psychologists measured this 30 years ago. Well, at the time, it was 2009. So 30 years ago would have been 1979. In 1979, 80% of people said that they were concerned for people less fortunate than them. In 2009, that number dropped to 60%. And that's a 30-year jump. Now, if you really break it down, we've gone another half of that. We've gone 15 years since that point. So by that logic, you've probably lost about another 10%.
So about 50%.
You're looking at about 50% of people care about people less fortunate than them, which is insane, right? If you really break it down, the world is starting to lose its compassion more and more. And we squabble over petty things because we can't understand other people. More importantly, we label ourselves as, based on our political views, our gender, our race, our worldviews. We align with these labels and then we refuse to understand the other side. We refuse to look at people because they're, liberal or conservative, whatever their beliefs are. All of a sudden, their opinion isn't valid because I don't want to hear it, right? It's disappointing how divided the world is and how much we argue over petty stuff, when at the end of the day, we're all human. We all make mistakes. We all live and breathe the same air. Everything about us is similar. The only thing is this stupid label that you put on yourself to differentiate you from others. And now all of a sudden, just because there's a different label on that guy, he's different. He's not worth having empathy for or compassion. That's absurd.
First off, congratulations. You absolutely cooked there. But it actually reminds me of a quote from, I can't believe I don't know his name, but the actor from Mr. Bean. I don't know his name.
It's on the tip of my tongue. Well, to be fair, we didn't really grow up watching Mr. Bean.
Yeah, we didn't really, but still, he's one of the greats. But what he said, it was in an interview, and he said that life in close-up is a tragedy, but in long view is a comedy. A lot of the time, when your scope is very small, life seems very sad, and events seem really tragic. But if you really zoom out, a lot of the times, they're funny moments. If you think about it, think back to things that were terrible in your past, some events, but they were really funny in retrospect. Like, for example, at one of our old friend's house, we had this little jelly minion. And see, even talking about it, he's laughing.
Oh my God.
But actually, I'm trying to think about... Okay, well, this is back in the Vine days, okay? So people weren't necessarily very offended back then. So there was this Vine of King
Batch.
And
his friend,
yeah.
the Muslim guy. His name is Anwar Jabawi.
Yeah, and they were at a gym, and they were doing a skit where they're both running on treadmills, and then
Anwar's wearing traditional clothes.
Yeah, traditional Muslim clothes, and he is singing a song, and he yells, "This place about to blow up!" And then King Batch runs as fast as he can. Right? It's a funny video back then. Still is, in my opinion, but if
Hilarious, okay?
if that's not your humor, it's not your humor. But anyway, we had watched this video and we were all, jumping around the room laughing. And then we picked up this jelly minion. And my friend he had a spinning fan in his ceiling with a light in the middle. And we were throwing the minion up at the fan, like just for fun, to see it get knocked around. So he picks up the minion and then he yells, "This place is about to blow up," and he throws the minion up. It hits the fan and the light from the fan
the
falls.
The shell
the shell of the light falls and shatters across the floor. Now we are all terrified. And then his mom comes upstairs. We all get in trouble. Like, it was a terrible experience. But now we look back on that, and every time that we think about minions or this place about to blow up meme, we think about that event and we laugh. Because in the future, past becomes funny. It's a meaning, or it's a sign that you've grown.
Yeah.
It's it's kind of like how you think that your past self was cringe. You think the things you did were cringe. And that's just because you're becoming a more mature person. So what you can't appreciate now, down the line, you probably will be appreciative of it. So try and widen your scope of life. Don't always condense things down moment by moment.
Yeah.
Because sometimes if you take a step back, you'll see that life is really beautiful, right? And those specks of disaster are what gives some spice to your life.
100%.
And what make it kind of funny at times.
Yeah, imagine eating a chicken that only had like salt on it.
Yeah.
That's kind of lame. You got to have some, chili powder in there, some tahini every once in a while. That's your life. You got to season it up a little bit. But another thing is involving empathy. When it comes to other people, one place where we tend to discard our empathy is when we're in an argument or a fight. Usually, you are very understanding of how other people react to what you say. You're very careful with what you say. But when you get into a fight, all of a sudden you abandon it in order to win or defend your position, which is, I would say, is wrong. It's not fair for you to abandon it just because you need to hurt this person's feelings to win an argument, right? I don't think that's justifiable ever. At the end of the day, we're all people and we're trying to get better. And if you are really right in this scenario, you shouldn't have to yell at a person or insult them directly to win. That's why people say when you insult somebody about something completely unrelated, you immediately lose the discussion. Point is, to be empathetic is to do it as often as possible. You don't want to be the guy who's very nice, except for when it comes to a verbal disagreement, and then he just starts freaking out and calling you out.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing, right? And at the end of the day, you should be able to deliver your points in a calm, collected manner. I'm not saying you're perfect. You're going to make mistakes every once in a while, like everyone does, but learn to understand how other people would feel based on what you're saying. And imagine if they said it to you, right? Same thing applies.
One thing that I learned, it was from Jordan Peterson. He was on a podcast, and he was talking about what it means to be a true friend. And he's talking in the interview, and he said, a real friend is someone who, when you say, "I have a problem," they don't solve it for you immediately. And that really, struck me to my core. Because I've always had this thought of, oh man, if somebody has a problem, let me just solve it. And that's the kind of person that I am. When I have problems, I just go to solve them. But sometimes a person's just looking for someone to sit in the pain with. They don't need you to pull them out right away. And what I learned from, being on this podcast and talking so much about helping people, there isn't one way to do it. Help doesn't just come in one way. Because think about it this way. Even on this podcast, we've contradicted ourselves many times. And that's not because we don't follow what we do. The point is that, first off, this podcast is just a way of us expressing to you the different ways that people can heal, the ways that people can get better. That doesn't mean that one way is the best for you. And I was up really late. I think it was about 2 nights ago. And I wrote this down because I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And what I wrote was, how do I know that I'm right? When I make a decision on how to fix a problem, how do I know I'm picking the right way? Some people say to talk about it, others say to work on it. What do I do? I'm confused because I see a million perfect ways for people to be happy, yet they still seem sad. Everybody deals with pain in their own way. There's tons of ways that every, science expert will tell you how to deal with pain. Every podcaster, every motivational speaker will tell you how to deal with pain. But there is no cure-all. And that was the realization I had that night, is that I like to think a lot. I've talked about it on the podcast before, is that I like to think a lot, especially at night. And I always wondered, when my friends are in trouble, what would I say? How would I help them? And the more I thought about that, the more I realized that I can't just give advice on how to be perfect. I can't give advice on how to be happy that simply. Because the truth is, we all heal differently. There is no fix all. And that was like a big revelation for me. And I then wrote, do something. Whenever you're in pain, even if you're not sure it's the right step, try. To truly do nothing is to move nowhere at all. Make a step towards happiness. When dealing with sadness, face it one way, and if it doesn't work, try another and another and another. Never give up on healing. Because no matter what, if you give up, that's when the pain actually wins. So I'd suggest that when you have friends who are going through pain, to any of you out there, friends or if you have friends that are going through pain, understand that no matter how many videos or tactics you read about, none of it will make you better. What makes you better is doing. It doesn't matter how many podcasts you listen to if you don't try what they tell you to do. You can't just listen. You need to do. And also, when your friends are in pain, just sit with them and help them figure it out. You don't figure it out for them. Because the reality is, they're not going to do it the same way that you would. We always want to go into a scenario acting as if that person is you. Which is interesting because that's the whole root of empathy, right? Is to put yourself in their shoes. But the reality is you can't actually imagine their shoes. You can try. But sometimes just sit with people. Just listen to what they have to say. And just say, I'm sorry, man. But we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Not, this is how you fix it. This is how you fix it. Come on, man. Why are you being so weak? Just sit down. And just heal with them.
Well, some people learn differently. Some people need the, get up and get to work. Like that's how they heal. That's just how it is. But interestingly enough, that book right there, How to Win Friends and Influence People, gives the perfect quote for that, where you need to learn how other people can take your advice the best. Because if they don't want to take your advice, they won't. And the quote from that book is, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So if he or she is not willing to accept your advice and help in that situation, then they're not going to grow at all. So that's why it's important sometimes to just lend them what they need. If they just need an ear for, somebody to talk to, then give that to them. If they want somebody to help them figure it out, then help them out the best you can, right? That's the basis of empathy, is seeing what somebody else needs and trying your best to understand those feelings and help them out.
And that's especially with help, is that it's not about you.
Yeah.
And it's kind of it's the same thing with when you hurt somebody as when you help somebody. Because a lot of the times, maybe other people don't find themselves doing it, but I sometimes find myself doing it where I want to give this person the greatest and revolutionizing, life-changing advice ever. But sometimes I'm just not equipped for it. Sometimes it's just not my job. Sometimes my role is just to put a smile on that person's face or to frown with them. That's sometimes just your job. And there was another thing that I wrote that night about being, help to other people. And I said, when it comes to helping others, be a tree, not a log. Be there to provide shade when they are hot, support them while they fall, but do not allow them to cut you down and use your resources at your expense, right? You need to be there for people. When they need you, you're there. That's what it means to be a tree, is when they're there, you are there. Or when you need them, you're there. When they need you, you're there. But that doesn't mean to give yourself up for them. It means to be a person who stands strong with them, who helps them stand when their legs are weak, right? You don't always need to pull people along on your path. Sometimes you just need to help them walk on their own.
All right, and the last thing I'll talk about on the importance of empathy that also came from the TED Talk that I watched is the idea of how you can characterize human empathy. And what I mean by that is empathy built into our genetic makeup, or is it a trait we can learn and improve? Now, funny enough, like with a lot of things, actually, people used to think that empathy is something you are born with. Same thing with artistic ability, right? Some people are born with better capabilities in those fields, but overall, over time, we've learned that art, empathy, and creativity are skills that you can develop. They're not things that you're inherently born with. And there was a study that Jamil brought up in his TED Talk that hit this point home for me like crazy, okay? So pretty much the study is comprised of this, all right? So they took men and women and they gave them a test. They said, here's a situation. I want you to guess how this person feels. And then based on how accurate their answers were, they got a score. So 42% of women got it right on the first try, while only 28% of men got it right. Now that statistic looks kind of bad, but funny enough, the researchers did a follow-up case. They said, okay, now we're going to pay you for every answer you get right. And now the women's number jumped to 48%, so a 6% increase. But the men's score skyrocketed to 42% from 28%, since bread was involved. It's funny because it shows that when incentivized, anybody can learn to empathize. You can understand somebody's point of view when the right incentive is in place. Think about your last argument. Were you really trying to hear their side of things, or were you just trying to justify your own? That's the truth. Because empathy is about understanding. You'll never understand somebody if you aren't genuinely trying to reach it. That's the biggest point in all conversation, in all disagreements. It's the fact that you go into it with the thought process of not understanding them. You just go into it to defend your own stance. And at the end of the day, with the right incentive in place, we can all learn and get better at empathizing. So
it's like it's acceptance. You need to accept, first off, when you're wrong, and accept when they're right. If you stand and say, I'm going to die on the hill that I'm right, what's the point? At that point, you shouldn't even be having the conversation. You need to wait until it's a time where you are willing to accept. You aren't always right. And same thing goes for other people. Other people aren't always right either. But always be open to listening to others. That's why I say that, like, we talk about stoicism very often, and it's so necessary because of this specific reason. Because when you are more stoic and you are not reacting as heavily to other people's attacks at you, you can really understand their underlying point. A lot of conflict can be avoided through this, especially when it comes to things like relationships. A lot of them end because of miscommunication, misunderstandings, and a refuse to compromise. But compromise is necessary for, love to take place, in my opinion. Without compromise, you're just two separate people. It's interesting because it's something called the Michelangelo effect. Do you know what it is? It's where basically it says that two people who meet each other are like two blocks of stone. And as they, get to know each other more and they love each other more, they begin to carve the person that they truly desire out of the other person. Right? So for example, two people meet each other and they aren't ideal for each other. Like the man isn't ideal for the woman or whoever the two people that they love are, they aren't ideal for each other. But as time goes on, they sculpt each other into the person that they adore. It's really cool. Like, I didn't know it was a thing, but apparently that's a real effect. So as time goes on, you become the person that your partner loves. I had no idea. But that only happens when you begin to compromise, right? You can't love somebody who will never change.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, you will. Inevitably, you'll change. But you need to accept that and choose to accept it.
Yeah.
Right? You need to move past it.
And now that we've completely gone over why empathy is so important, I think it's also important to discuss how you empathize with other people, which this entire episode, I feel like some people would call cringe because it's one of those topics that is very, what's the word? Like feel good in a sense. Like it's just one of those things that everybody knows, like, oh yeah, I should try to understand other people's point of views. But it's very ironic that in that same way that they say, oh yeah, I've already heard all of this before, it's this exact reason why you need to teach empathy, because they're not open to listening to our points. But regardless, how do you properly empathize with someone? Rule number one, of course, try to relate their experiences to something you've experienced before. I heard a story of this guy who lost his dad a couple weeks ago, and he was really suffering. And one of his cousins called him, and the reason why he was able to not necessarily get over it, but really process that situation is because she had also lost her father recently as well. And that conversation between them really helped him, understand what it's going to be like and that it's okay because other people have gone through it too. At the end of the day, if you think about it, there are very, very, very exceptionally few cases of things in this world that you go through that somebody else hasn't gone through before. maybe the circumstances are slightly different. The people are obviously different, but regardless, the circumstance remains, right? Typically, most experiences you have, somebody else has definitely gone through it. So to find somebody else that can tell you, like, hey, this is how I dealt with it, is very helpful and reassuring. So being that person for somebody else is the cornerstone of empathizing. Right?
You know what's interesting is actually, I mean, I was thinking about this because I did actually see another video. I think it might have been Jordan Peterson again. But he talked about how sometimes when people are going through, I mean, because he's like a psychologist and everything, right? In his line of work, what he's found, I think it's him. I don't want to like quote him and him not have said this, but on the off chance that he did, which I believe he did, he talked about how sometimes people actually don't want to hear how you've been in pain, which is interesting because obviously on paper it makes sense. And I think in my life it has comforted me to know that. But sometimes when you talk to people about their pain and you're like, oh yeah, man, I've been through that, it's kind of like
reducing their suffering.
Yeah, first off, reducing it, and secondly, you're making it about yourself again, right?
Yeah.
Without them, instead of acknowledging that, it's like, hey man, I'm sorry that you're going through that. It's like, don't worry because I did it already.
Yeah.
It's reassuring to some people, but it's really destroying to others. So I definitely exercise caution with it, but I definitely down the line, as people begin to heal, you can guide them on the path and be like, hey man, like this is kind of how I did it. Whether you can do it like this too, something like that. But yeah, I just heard that and I was like, it's an interesting thing because
I think there's a time for each. There's a time to listen and a time to talk. So that's the whole point of empathizing, because it's understanding and then articulating.
Yeah,
right?
You know what's interesting is like this whole episode has been a lot of contradiction, especially for me, of what I know and what I now know. So one of the things that I've learned, it was actually really cool. I saw this video of this guy, and it's something that we talk about is how like you should express gratitude for what you have. So, you know, there's always somebody in a worse position. And he talked about how one person, it's like a skit, and one guy's like, dude, I'm feeling so sad. And then he's like, dude, there's people out there in such worse situations. You shouldn't feel sad. And then he said, well, there's people in much better situations, so should I never feel happy? And that one, I mean, obviously you can compare. It's greed and gratitude, right? One person, on one sense, you're trying to get everything else, and the other sense, you're not appreciating what you have. But it's comparison that is really destructive of the soul. It's understanding that you are your own person, and that no matter how much you may look outwards, it's not going to fix what's in here, right? That's only fixed by you going out there and doing, exploring, learning, living. That's the only way that you actually heal all the problems that are in here. So when you're sad out there, I'd say your first instinct shouldn't be to think about everybody else, but to think about you, right? When you deal with pain, that's why it's so essential to have a person in your corner that won't just talk about themselves, but instead talk about you and ask you, how are you really doing? How can I help you? It shouldn't just be about giving advice, but about being there. Because the reality is, as I said, we're all going to deal with things differently. And scenarios will hit us differently. Again, that's important. Because what's extremely hurtful to me might not be hurtful to you. It was in the same video that I mentioned earlier. Or like it's from a Instagram reel. It was a very long reel. But it said that words that may not hurt one person cut deep for another. So just because it didn't hurt you that much doesn't mean it won't hurt that person that much. So it's very hard to sit here and say, you know, I went through it and I was fine, so you should be fine. That's what you shouldn't say. It's not about it being okay for you, so it must be okay for them. It should be that it's okay for you, so it can be good for you, right? And you just guide them along. Don't string them along and, you know, pull them in your direction because you know best. Because the truth is you don't. Knowing that is how you help others heal, is by understanding that you don't know everything and that life is a process of figuring it out. So to let others figure out their own path is essential, because at the end of the day, you're not only going to come across one problem in your life, but once you learn who you are and how to deal with them, problems become a lot smaller.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And helping other people at the end of the day is what empathy is about. It's not just self-serving. It also helps a lot of other people. So the second point on how to empathize well with other people, especially if you don't have shared experiences with them. Like, let's say they go through something extremely tragic, like their best friend died in a car crash and because his girlfriend committed suicide or something crazy like that. You obviously have no idea what to think in that situation because you haven't been through it. Sometimes, like we said, the best thing is just to ask open-ended questions about how they can explain their feelings, how they're really doing in this situation. Because at the end of the day, having that annoying person who just asks prying questions and says like, hey, if you want to talk, like maybe you could start here. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? Is one good friend, I'd say. That person who asks questions and genuinely wants to hear from you is the kind of guy you want around you forever. And it's funny because it's actually a quote in that book as well, How to Win Friends and Influence People, that I was going to say way earlier in this episode because you brought it up. But principle 1 on how to get people to really like you is literally titled, be genuinely interested in that person and what they're interested in. If their life is going a certain direction, you should genuinely ask them questions about it. That's how some of my most genuine connections came from. When I ask questions, I ask from the heart. I ask because I genuinely want to know the answer, right? If I talk to somebody new at the gym, you saw this when we went and talked to that guy. Shout out to my boy Rick, even though he's not watching. When we walked up to him and talked to him, I'm asking him questions not because I just want to make small talk with him. I'm asking him because I actually want to know what kind of life he lives and to get a better understanding of who he is. So in the same way, empathy will teach you how to ask the right questions. You want to ask open-ended questions and learn more about people because you're genuinely interested.
And, this actually relates to a quote I was going to use by Theo Von. Right? I didn't know Theo Von got so real, but I started seeing a lot of his clips from his podcast, and this is the thing he said. And he said, the thing about being alone is that it's not that you feel like you have no one, it's that you feel like no one has you. And you could be surrounded by 1 million people, but if not a single one of them is there for you when you need them, then what's really the point? That's true loneliness, right? Because you could be in a friend group of, let's say, 13 people, and you always hang out with them. You guys always go out, and on your highs, you guys are always together. But when it's on the low, when you're in the deepest, darkest place, how many of those people are really there for you? And you need to reflect on your own life and ask yourself, how can I be there for everybody else, right? It's difficult because sometimes you want to focus on yourself, which is very important, but don't always discard the people around you because, again, empathy. And think about empathy when I say this next phrase. And the phrase is, the day a blind man sees, the first thing he throws away is the stick that helped him his whole life. If you're a crutch for people around you, they might throw you away. That's reality. The reality is you may help somebody, and the day that they don't need you, they might leave. It's a sad reality, but it's a true one. It happens to a lot of people where they help countless people, but when they need it, the favor's not returned. But you need to accept that. Don't go and help people with the expectation that they're going to help you back. While it would be if we had a perfect world, we don't. We live in an imperfect world with imperfect people. And sometimes those people are going to go off on their own. But smile through that fact. Smile about the fact that you helped somebody. And smile knowing that if it was you in that scenario, you would have stuck around, right? That's okay. It doesn't matter how other people treat you shouldn't shape the person you become, right? Even if you have to walk alone, walk the path of kindness and be a good person. Be an empathetic person and care about the people around you.
Yeah, that's like the most important thing about this entire podcast as a whole. Realistically, we started this because it might not be a super popular idea, right? Kindness to everyone and, all this positivity content isn't super, super prevalent in today's society. And it's not something that pops off easily on social media either, right? I can't just upload a random clip from our podcast and get 1 million views. Like if I clipped, Speed doing something stupid. If I clip that nonsense and put it on TikTok, that'll get millions of views in a day. But that's not why we do this. We do this because regardless of how many people do it or how difficult it is to push content like this and actually make it work, it's the right message to push. It's the right things to talk about. It's how to make people's lives better. Because at the end of the day, we're here on this earth, right? And I'd rather spend my time helping everybody get better than sit here and just do what is very self-serving. right? So the third point on how to empathize well with others is watch the content that you're consuming. Movies and stories about other people's lives can be life-changing for you. It can completely shape your perspective on a certain experience. Like when you watch a movie, you resonate with characters because you empathize with them. You understand where they're coming from, and you can really see their true nature, right? That's why you actually care for certain characters. Like look at Zuko, one of the most famous characters that people really, really like is because we saw his whole story and we understood him and we empathized with him. That's why we learn so much from him. So in the same way, you might not share experiences with people, or you might share experiences with people. But at the end of the day, you can always learn something by reading a book about somebody's life or watching a movie that shows you a perspective you never thought of. At the end of the day, it's about consuming content and framing your perspective and understanding of the world. That's what's important, right?
And also, I mean, I know this is kind of like me sneaking this into the very last. As we're coming to the conclusion of the episode, there was one thing that I really wanted to talk about. We didn't get around to it, but it was about forgiveness and how forgiving others isn't actually always about others. And it's interesting. I saw this quote, and I love this quote. I have no idea where it came from, but I really love it. And the quote is, don't always forgive others because they deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve peace, right? You hang up on this anger, but in reality, you hurt yourself more often than others. I know it's not completely in line with the theme of today, but I really wanted to express that because we hold this grudge against other people for what? Because a lot of the times they're not even searching for it. But just let go. Let go of it, find peace, and focus on the people that you really care about and the ones that care about you. Why are you focusing on the people who don't care about what you have to say? Instead, go to the people that need you, the people that really want you by their side, because those are the people that are going to have your corner in the end. But as you guys know, this video has come to its end, but stick around a little bit longer because it is time for Quote
Of
the
week.
Here.
Quote of the week. Formulating an opinion is not listening. Neither is preparing a response or defending our position or attacking another's. To listen impatiently is to hear nothing at all. Listening is suspending disbelief. And that is from Rick Rubin and his book, The Creative Act. And I thought that this was a very good quote for this episode because empathy is about understanding other people. But you can't understand other people if you go into the conversation trying to defend yourself, like I said earlier. And so to defend yourself when somebody else is speaking is a disservice to the speaker and to yourself because you don't know what could have evolved in your mind. Your thought process could have changed if you actually listened to what that person had to say. You don't know what kind of value they could have brought, and you don't know what they're going through. You could have understood them a lot better if you just listened to them. So that last part about suspending disbelief is very important. You just need to believe them and give them the chance to explain why they feel the way they do. And when you do that, I think that not only do you become a better person, but you help that other person who's talking to you become better too.
Thank you guys so much for sticking around to the very end of episode 34 of the Brighter Horizons podcast. Once again, thank you guys so much for over 100,000 views. It is absolutely crazy that we have reached that kind of a point. And we're really, really grateful to every single one of you. And I really hope that we have helped you in helping other people. It's kind of like a chain effect where we'll help you, you'll help others, and it'll go down the line. So remember that helping isn't about you, but it's about them. Make sure that the other person feels heard and that you can understand what they feel like. Try to understand. And with that, make sure you live a positive life, y'all. Peace out.